Number 1. Trick or treat. The creepiest thing that ever happened to me in my life occurred when I was about 10 years old. I was out trick-or-treating with some friends of mine. We were all around the same age. This happened back in the 1970s. I wanted to mention that because it is important to know that us kids were not accompanied by an adult. This sort of trick-or-treating was a bit more common then than it would be nowadays. We lived in a huge neighborhood that had tons of kids in it. So on Halloween, the streets were pretty much littered with kids. I guess our parents assumed that because there were so many other kids around, that it meant we would be safe by ourselves. There were about 5 of us in the group. I think the oldest was my friend Jack, who was 12 at the time. I was dressed as a scarecrow. Not the most terrifying of costumes, but I really liked it at 10. The 5 of us came to a really old house. We were on a block that I really wasn't too familiar with. It didn't matter to us, though. The more streets we went down, and the more blocks we crossed, the more candy we would get. The house wasn't lit up too much, but it did have a jack-o'-lantern on the porch. All the kids in my group were pretty freaked out by it for some reason. Jack told me that there were rumors that a real witch lived in the house. He said that she would occasionally kidnap children and cast spells on them. None of my friends wanted to go up to the house, and honestly, neither did I. But I wanted candy, and also wanted to show that I was the bravest of the group. So while my friends stood back, I walked up the steps to the porch and knocked on the door. An older gray-haired lady answered the door. She was carrying a bowl with her, but strangely enough, the bowl was empty. She seemed genuinely pleased to see me. She complimented me on my costume. She asked me some strange questions like, did I scare any crows that day? I smiled and told her yes, and then said, "Trick or treat." Looking at her bowl, the lady seemed surprised that she was out of candy. But then she told me that if I came into her house, she would be able to give me a treat from her kitchen. I really didn't want to go in, but 2 things convinced me to go. 1, I really wanted the candy. 2, I was told to always be polite to adults and do what they tell me to do. I went inside the house with the old woman, and she closed the door. I followed her into the kitchen. She led me over to her pantry, and she opened it up. I assumed that was where she kept her candy. I went over to look in the pantry, and she quickly grabbed me and shoved me into the pantry and closed the door. I was absolutely terrified and immediately started crying and banging on the door. I screamed for her to let me out. All the things that my friend had told me about the woman being a witch came back to me. I was convinced that she really was a witch, and she was going to eat me. I kept banging on the door and begging to be let out. After what seemed like a long time, but was probably just a few short moments, the old woman opened the door. She seemed really amused. She told me that she had run out of treats, so she had to give me a trick instead. She just kept laughing, as if what she had done to me was the funniest thing in the world. I ran past her and back into her front room and out the door. My friends were standing on the sidewalk. They had been worried about me, and seeing me running at them crying only made it worse. Jack took me home to my parents, and we told them what happened. My parents called the police, and I guess they went and talked to the old woman. She insisted that she had meant no harm. She was just out of treats and felt she should give me a trick instead. Nothing really happened. She wasn't arrested or anything. But that was definitely the scariest thing that ever happened to me on Halloween. Number 2. Delivery. This happened when I worked as a pizza delivery boy. I was a bit irritated because it fell on me to work on Halloween. We didn't get too much business that night, but still, I would have much rather been spending time with my friends partying. This also happened a really long time ago. The night was slow, as I mentioned, but we got an order for a plain cheese pizza around 11 p.m. I'll never forget that pizza. Once it was done, I took it and I drove out to the address given. It was right on the edge of our delivery area. There weren't any lights on the house, which was pretty annoying. I actually almost passed the house because I had no way of seeing the address that good. The house had a relatively long driveway. I drove up, wondering if we had gotten the wrong address. There was nothing that indicated to me that anyone could have been home. There were no lights, no cars. Well, at least I thought there were no lights. As I got out of the car with the pizza and walked up the stairs, I noticed that there was actually a jack-o'-lantern on the porch. The candle was pretty dim, though. It must have been burning for a while. So even if there was no one there now, there was someone there at one point. I went up and knocked on the door. There wasn't an answer. Annoyed, I knocked again. No answer. I was about to finally give up and leave, when the door actually opened. The person standing in the doorway was a pretty large and scary-looking guy. I gave him the price and he started feeling around for his wallet. "I must have left my wallet in the kitchen," he said. "Come on in and I'll get your money." I did not want to walk into a dark house with a guy who looked like him. I just told him I had no problem waiting on the porch for him. He then insisted, though, that I should come in. He told me it might take him a few minutes to find his wallet. He said there was no need to just stand out in the dark. I almost considered it. You know, sometimes you feel inclined to do something against your better judgment. And that's what I was feeling. I was thinking maybe I could get the whole experience over with by simply going in with him. I mean, what were the chances that something bad was really going to happen? I was actually about to say okay, but then I noticed something. The man's eyes quickly looked over to the side. It was just for a split second, but I caught it. I looked over and got the shock of my life. There was another big guy, crouched down off the side of the porch. He was peering over the side, watching me. That startled me, of course, but it wasn't as scary as what happened next. When he saw that I had noticed him, he stood straight up. The guy in the house actually made a grab at me. Terrified, I just threw the pizza directly at him. The guy on the porch was coming around to the staircase, and he was holding a baseball bat in his hand. I was freaked, but I couldn't get down the stairs before he got to the stairs. Knowing I didn't have much time to do anything, I just ran to the side of the porch and jumped over it into the driveway. Fortunately, that was the side my car was on. I got into it quickly. Both guys were now coming down the stairs. The guy with the bat was, of course, closer. I hadn't turned my car off, so all I had to do was put it in reverse. The guy with the bat was fast, though, and he managed to hit the window on my door. The glass shattered and got all over me. Fortunately, I already had the car in reverse. I hit the gas hard and haphazardly drove backward out of the driveway. The guys were still coming at me, but there wasn't really anything they could do at this point. I got to the end of the driveway, turned, and took off down the road. I reported the incident to the police. I described the two men, and as it turns out, they fit the description of two guys who had held up a liquor store earlier. The police assumed that they were planning on stealing my car. It made sense, really, due to the way they were acting. However, whatever they were going to do to me to get the car, that we had no idea about. It was definitely a terrifying situation. Number 3. Fog Walk. I went to a Halloween party when I was a freshman in college. It is important to know that I was a townie, so I didn't live on campus. I had a pretty decent walk from my house to the school. It is also quite the experience because the campus is so big and it is usually swarming with people. However, you only need to get a block away from it and it completely changes. I've had several walks home in which I hadn't ran into anyone at all. But that year, I decided to go to an on-campus Halloween party. Most of my friends have gone off to other colleges. The majority of the people on campus were all from other towns and other states, so although I had lived in the town all of my life, I really didn't have any friends my first year of college. So I thought going to the party would be a good way to try and make some new friends. It really didn't work out that way. I talked to a few people at the party, and I had a few drinks, but I didn't really have the best time. I watched some people playing beer pong. They even had a band that was dressed up in costumes while they played. It was fun to watch, but I really wasn't having that great of a time. It was as I was sitting down and having a drink, pondering whether or not I should just go home, that I saw a guy in a skeleton costume looking at me. The costume was a lot like the ones from the movie The Karate Kid that the Cobra Kai guys were wearing. He was standing off to the side of the refreshment table and just kept staring at me. Although I was there to try and make some friends, I didn't want to go up and talk to him. It's too creepy when someone just stares blankly at you for a long time. So I tried to just ignore him. This didn't work so well when I had to go and refresh my drink. I walked up to the table, and it was so creepy. He didn't even say anything to me, but he just kept staring at me. Have you ever had someone staring at you, and you have to try as hard as possible to ignore them? You have to avoid looking at them, and it's painfully obvious that that is what you're doing. Yeah, that was what I had going on. This went on for a while. I finally decided that the party was a bust, so I decided to go home. I had actually been at the party for several hours. I made my way out through the crowd, happy to just be away from the skeleton. I was eager to get home. I was a bit shocked when I got out of the building, though. A really dense fog had descended upon the town while I had been inside. It was one of those fogs where it's really difficult to see anything in front of you for more than a few feet. Fortunately, however, I knew where I was going, and I didn't think I would have any problem getting home. So I set off. This is going to sound like a pretty typical stalker story, I guess. While I was walking, I did think that I heard someone walking behind me. But every time I stopped walking to listen, there would be no sounds of steps. Shortly after I began walking again, I would swear that I heard the sound of someone else's steps matching my own. I tried not to worry about it, more than convinced that it was all in my head. I got off campus and began walking down the side streets in the neighborhood to try and get home. As I turned down one street, I got the shock of my life. Although I couldn't make him out in the thick fog, I saw a figure standing in the light of a street lamp just up ahead of me. I immediately knew that it had to be the skeleton. He was dressed in black and definitely had the same build. Plus he was just standing there. Somehow, he must have cut ahead of me. I panicked. I turned around to run the other way. Almost immediately, I ran right into the skeleton guy. He grabbed onto me. I realized I must have been mistaken about the person I saw ahead of me, so I of course screamed. The guy kept a hold on me and tried to put his hand over my mouth. I heard someone behind me yell, and I realized it must have been the guy I saw before me. The skeleton was startled as he likely hadn't known the other guy was there. He panicked and threw me to the ground. He quickly ran off into the fog. The new guy helped pick me up off the ground. Apparently he lived right there and had taken his small dog out to go to the bathroom. That was why he was standing in place. He helped me up and made sure I was okay. It was a scary-ass experience. Even worse was the fact that I couldn't really do anything about it. The guy was in a costume, so I couldn't give the police any real description of him. He got away, completely free. Hey y'all, Killer Orange Cat here. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. Feel free to share it with someone you think might enjoy it. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, please hit the button next to the tabby to be informed of new content. Feel free to follow Ichigo and myself on Facebook and Twitter. Wow, it's been a crazy week. I had meant to come out with a few videos this week, but I completely got sidetracked when on Tuesday, and seemingly out of nowhere, the views from my "Hi Walter, I got a new girlfriend today" video began skyrocketing. Of course, I had tons of people sending me comments and messages, convinced that since the video was being investigated by the police, that it was a real video. Fortunately, it was definitely not a real video. It would have disturbed me to think that the video of an actual kidnapping had sat on YouTube for 7 years before anyone ever noticed it. Still, it was a weird experience trying to keep up with everything that was going on. I do feel bad for everybody involved, as I'm sure it was a trying few days for them. Other than that, I'm still working on that Halloween special. I don't have quite 100 stories yet, so if you have a paranormal story that you'd like to share, please send it to the address included in the description. If you have any other scary stories that are not paranormal, feel free to share them as well. As I tell everyone, I often get backlogged in emails, and it takes me a while to respond, but do not fret, I will respond eventually. I hope everyone is enjoying a nice and relaxing fall. But since the nights are long, and growing longer every day, it's more important to keep this in mind. Make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a killer orange cat might be hiding. Good night.